We have, as I said, fresh from Athens, Vasileios Mingos. He has a strong background in building and leading information security teams since 2017. He's the European Operations Director at Health-ISAC, and previous to that, he developed and implemented Eurofin Security Operations Center, as well as the Security Intelligence Program in Europe. So, welcome, Vasileios.
Thank you very much for having me. Okay, so first of all, great meeting you everyone today. I brought the sunshine all the way from Greece, so I'm very happy for that. My pleasure. We heard about some of the weather, and unfortunately, it's gonna look like a storm most of this session. So don't worry too much about it. I'll be talking about the cyber threat landscape and why information sharing actually makes sense. I'll take just a brief moment. There we go. I'll take just a brief moment to show you right here what an ISAC is for those that you are not familiar with the concept. So ISACs are information sharing analysis centers. They started from the US, they exist all over the world right now. The information sharing analysis centers focus on critical infrastructure, and there are conglomerates of those. There is the National Council of ISACs in the United States and the European Council of ISACs here in Europe, and we are working together to pretty much bridge all the barriers between the different sectors and collaborate. Right here. Now, what we are a private, non-profit, member-driven organization that pretty much enables collaboration and information sharing within the healthcare sector. But let's talk about why we are here, right? As I said, I'll be talking about some of the storms out there. I'll start on my left-hand side right here. We'll talk about some of the major impactful events that happened throughout the history, right? Back in 2015, excuse me, we had the Anthem data breach. The Anthem data breach is one of the biggest data breaches actually that ever happened. It's about 80 million patient data, patient records actually being leaked in the dark web, right? For those not familiar with how much a patient data record goes in the dark web, it goes in from 100 euros to about 150 euros per record. If you think about credit card record, that goes for about 1 to 5 euros. So you can think of how much more interesting it is for threat actors to target that type of data to make it more profitable for themselves. Primera and Excellus were also two big data breaches that happened there. But let's move to Hollywood Presbyterian. Hollywood Presbyterian is a hospital in Los Angeles, California, in the United States. And why this particular event is really important is because they had a ransomware incident, right? Who doesn't nowadays? But this particular one was very interesting because they were really public. They went public and they said they paid the ransom and everything was fine. The ransom, by the way, was $17,000. That's it. 17,000 back in 2016. So while that was kind of an okay statement back then, it painted pretty much a target in the back of healthcare organizations. Health delivery organizations need to be operational to provide their services. And threat actors can target those organizations to make sure that they cannot provide it and monetize that opportunity, right? We all heard about ransomware. We'll see some numbers later. Then we have the WannaCry and Petya not Petya. Yeah, interesting incidents. So I guess we all know both of them. I'll focus a little bit on Petya not Petya. So Petya was a ransomware strain that came out in 2017. A few months later, another strain came out. So the first one, Petya, was being spread through phishing emails, like 96% of nowadays events. NotPetya was a supposedly same ransomware strain that came out. The difference between those two was that the first one was a ransomware strain. The second one aimed to disrupt parts of the computer, so the operation of the computer would stop. So if we think of patients, like kill its heart, then it won't work. Easy. The problem with NotPetya was that there was a lot of misinformation around. Everybody was rushing to make statements. They were pointing fingers here and there, but actually, it is also a great collaboration story. For those familiar with MSD or Merck in the United States, the pharmaceutical company, they had a very good cybersecurity program at that point, and there was a study that they could actually stop ransomware attacks and generally cybersecurity events within minutes. So during NotPetya, they had about 90,000 PCs dying in about 90 seconds. So that's something for us to consider right there. Moving on, we had the SolarWinds vulnerability. Now, the SolarWinds vulnerability, for those not familiar with SolarWinds, it's a software that manages networks pretty much. So what happened in this case was that threat actors targeted that provider, they found a vulnerability, and this way they managed to get into multiple organizations that were using these softwares, this provider. So supply chain is also a big problem for us, unfortunately. Then we had the COVID-19. So I guess everybody hates COVID, same I do. But it pretty much shaped the world as we know it today, right? It moved all of the companies that previously did not even consider being operational digitally or working from home and all of those things suddenly had to work from home. There was no option, right? So at the same time, there was another vulnerability out there called Log4j. So Log4j is a library that is used in a lot of software for logging purposes. And that type of vulnerability started a discussion of where is it inside exactly and how people will patch it. So nowadays we are talking about the software bill of materials, SBOMs, right? So this was one of the main points that regulatory authorities were focusing on to bring that in. And then Moderna and Pfizer created their intellectual property for the COVID-19 vaccine, right? Every company would like to protect their intellectual property, obviously. But in this case, in order for them to be able to use their vaccine in the European Union, they had to give up their intellectual property to the European Medicines Agency. Shortly after, actually about a month after, nation-state actors from our Far East actually targeted the European Medicines Agency and they stole that intellectual property. So the intellectual property of a company can be stolen through a third party as well, because we have to adhere to regulations and specific requirements. Now, I'll talk about the colonial pipeline for a second. The reason I'm going to talk about the colonial pipeline, for those not familiar with what the colonial pipeline is a gas pipeline that runs in the west coast of the United States, right? Now, how does this connect with healthcare? It's about the colonial pipeline actually is having scheduled maintenances and it's having outages as well. But in the news, this was a very big problem. So there was an outage, there was a cybersecurity event in the business side of the company, not the operational side, which caused them to shut down their networks to make sure that it will not affect that. But because of the misinformation that took place in the news, because everyone was rushing to make statements, people were running to gas stations with plastic bags to get gas, as if you can make use of that. But this actually happened. So misinformation is out there. And this is another factor that we need to take into consideration. Also, why this is important, also for healthcare, is because back then, the Colonial Pipeline actually reported the incident to the FBI, but they did not report it to the Department of Homeland Security in the United States. So that caused a lot of frustration between the government, because half of the government had the information and the other half didn't. So this started all the discussions with the Network Information Security 2 regulation, which is coming up, or NIS2, as you probably know it, and CIRCIA in the United States, and other regulations that exist also, for example, India, etc. This was one of the catalysts, actually, that sparked the discussions. And then Change Healthcare. I would put here Vastamo as well and others, but who here has heard about Change Healthcare? So back in February, so let's take a step back. Change Healthcare is actually a health information exchange type of company. They're brokering details, and also they're providing payment services from payers to insurance, to insurers and the health delivery organizations. So back in February this year, actually, there was a cybersecurity event. They had a ransomware attack. And at that point, I won't say it so much because I'll touch upon Change Healthcare in a second. They brought down their services, which ended up also all the patients not being able to get the healthcare they needed or their medications, because no one could actually provide that type of services. I'll come back to that in a second. So this is how we get to our current world, right? This was a very nice historic, let's say, rundown with all the storms, and let's bring more storms. So we have more than 280,000 ransomware attacks in Southeast Asia nowadays. I always like to mention this one. So right now, if people would like to understand the capabilities of Chinese hackers, for example, if FBI would have to focus all their resources on just that, they would still be outnumbered 50-1. Now, the Akira ransomware group has targeted more than 250 organizations, and actually the Finnish Cybersecurity Center issued a warning about this. They have made more than 42 million in proceedings from ransomware. Change Healthcare, that I was talking about earlier, they had the event around the 22nd of February. Within a month, they had spent $872 million. Let me go a step ahead. And we're talking about small companies, we're talking about normal controls. Peter actually touched upon the top 5 controls that would save 90%, 99% of the attacks, right? So according to the studies in the United States, 6 out of 10 small companies face ransomware and phishing as their primary threat. But only 48% of those train employees on cybersecurity. Now, we're going down here, and we'll take for a moment. Of course, ransomware is on the rise, right? 22% increase in reported losses compared to 2022 from 23, and that's a record of $12.5 billion. Some more, not too many, but some more. We have right here that during COVID-19, the cybercrime shot up to 600%, right? That is easy, of course. Cyber criminals take on the advantage. They crafted these elaborate phishing emails. They were sending the e-phishing emails themed after COVID and targeting pretty much everyone, especially people that did not have too much information around cybersecurity in general. Phishing is causing about 90% of today's attacks and data breaches, and 96 of those come through email. Still 96 of those. There are still, because we touched upon AI earlier, there are some details that there is phishing taking place, so phishing over phone and so on, and the deep fakes, etc. This is still very early stages in the cyber threat landscape. There are not so many reports that this has been taken advantage, although there have been about 2 cases this year, not in healthcare, but a cloud provider was actually breached this way. Then ransomware attacks are seeing a significant 72.7 raise there, and the costs could be about $265 billion by 2031. Now, we talked about data breaches earlier, and here is something quite interesting. So the global cost, the average global cost for a data breach in 2023 was $4.45 million. This is something for us to consider. We need to be, in a way, ready for those. Now, some of the GRF analysts did some investigations for the second half of 2023. Out of those, we can see that the top sectors that are facing this type of incidents in the second half of 2023 were commercial, critical manufacturing, commercial facilities, IT, and healthcare. Nowadays, healthcare is usually amongst the top 3 or top 5 of most attacked industry, unfortunately. And the majority of those attacks were committed by Lockbit. There was also the disruption of Lockbit earlier this year. Actually, Lockbit managed to do all of that mostly through a vulnerability that they found in a supply chain attack. There have been 30 new ransomware groups in 2023. That's a 50% increase. And the EU has targeted about 21% into those attacks. And zero-day vulnerabilities, as always, are very lucrative for threat actors. Now, some concerns, those are facts, but some concerns. Microsoft actually spoke about Midnight Blizzard, which is a Russian state actor group, that they were able to get into senior leadership from Microsoft through breaching, through basic brute force attacks. And the second one, which is very interesting, so the United States, along with its allies, compiled a report on Volt Typhoon. So Volt Typhoon is a state actor group from China, and they were positioning themselves in US critical infrastructure to be able to cause disruptions in case there will be political tensions at some point. So it's not always about the money, corporate espionage, but it's also nation state and espionage that can take place. We saw that with the European Medicines Agency, and right here with the critical infrastructure from US. So if we are talking about managing risk, as we were saying earlier, in order to do that, we need to take into account, of course, excluding all the financial, regulatory, reputational type of risks. We're talking about systemic risks, geographic risks, operational cross-sector, and some concentration of services. Now, if we talk about geographic tensions take place, for example, Russia, Ukraine, Palestine, and Israel right now, which is happening. So in general, there are risks that we need to manage, right? And Change Healthcare actually was one of the biggest systemic risks in the United States. So what exactly happened with Change Healthcare, right? They were providing the services, they got a ransomware incident, they had to bring down the services, right? That caused all the different payers, so all the people that were insured, that they were going to the pharmacy to pick up their medicines, etc., they could not do that because the payment was not going through. People that were having scheduled operations, they could not get those because they did not have the capability to get paid. So they were actually asking them to schedule new ones. And then there is also the problem that the United States, when this happened, looked at Change Healthcare to actually go back and provide all the money, the private sector to provide all the money in order for all those to take place, and they would get it back later, right? As we saw earlier, it was about 875, if I remember correctly, million US dollars that they had spent for a month. This is still ongoing. And by the way, they did pay the ransom, and the ransom was about $22 million. So we are looking almost 3 months in, and 3 months later, they still did not operate fully, right? There was a lot of finger pointing between the United States, the government, and the private sector as who is to blame for this, who should take this into their bags and make sure that this never happens again. The United States were very vocal about this being a responsibility by the United Health Group. So United Health Group operates and owns Change Healthcare. But there is so much a private company can do, right? They used a lot of funds in order to try to help. There were similar, much smaller companies. Change Healthcare is operating about 80% of the services in the United States. So there were smaller companies that tried to step up and help, but still that was a big problem. So the government was caught off guard. There was no backup system. This was a systemic risk of convergence of services that actually got brought down, and still to this day it's not up. There are a lot of misinformation which took place. So a lot of organizations and media news outlet came out and they said United Health Group was actually targeted, which was not the truth. It was just a part of the United Health Group, just Change Healthcare. But because of that, they had to cut off communications with all the different parts of the United Health Group, which, by the way, it's extremely big in the United States. And that caused even more disruptions afterwards, right? And lastly, funding. The United States government was expecting the private sector to fund all of the different operations that were actually taking place. It did fund part of it, but of course, you do not have the government's power in order to provide all the money needed, right? By the way, I did not put it right here, but there is also an incident which took place a few weeks ago. The Ascension group was targeted. So that's a group of about 144 hospitals in the United States, which brought down their operations because of a ransomware incident, and they are still experiencing that. So with that, what does the future look like, right? It's all bad news. It goes from worse to worse. It doesn't look good. So we need to change a little bit our mentality right there. We need to change our mentality and move it from it won't happen to me, so what if it happens to me? It's really important for us to take necessary precautions to be in a position in order when something happens to us, for us to be ready to mitigate that risk, to mitigate that problem, and be able to be back in business really fast. That's the point. And what is the role of CISO in all of this? So Uber had an incident. The Lapsus Group managed to break through their defenses, SolarWinds and the United Health Group, as we're saying. With the new regulations coming up, executive leadership is going to be held accountable for these things. For example, in the United States, Timothy Brown, which is the Chief Information Security Officer for SolarWinds, is actually charged right now for fraud and internal controls violation, if I remember correctly. So he's facing criminal charges for a breach that happened to the organization. So it's up to all of the CISOs right there to be informed, to empower their teams and to make sure that the security will be there, and to be able to provide all the necessary details to the regulators once they come in, to make sure that they are also not facing criminal charges, but they did their best to their ability, both to themselves, but also to the company and the human lives that might be impacted out of this. Because I would say it's not just about the one and zeros. Yes, cybersecurity is there. We have of course, all the digital world behind us, but at the end of the day, it's about human life, right? Think about a hospital being actually targeted by a ransomware group or by a random group, going inside, changing about 100 people's blood types. Not doing anything else, just that. And then they're contacting the hospital and say, hey, we changed the records. You can't find them. Pay us, or we won't tell you which one that is. That could have impact on human life. Simply just that. So there are a lot of problems. Human life is more important. And of course, financial problems are always there. Ransomware incidents, data breaches, all of those are impactful, especially now with the new regulations coming up. Mandatory reporting is there, same as, for example, for GDPR. The Network Information Security 2 is going to have mandatory reporting. CIRCIA in the United States has mandatory reporting. There are more acts that are coming. A little bit bright news right there. United States and the European Union are working together to kind of harmonize those regulations and make sure that the requirements will be similar. So one won't have a 24-hour notice, the other a 48-hour notice, but it will be a little bit easier to follow. But still a long way to go right there. So with that, I would like to say that we are successful individually when we are successful together. Information sharing, collaborating actually works. The human race has managed all of these years to progress in the technology so fast because of the collaboration of all our minds. By working together, everybody shares their experience and we are learning from each other. We need to take advantage of that. Even if we are in a competitive space, and you have a company being competitive towards another company, it's always really important to work together on things that can impact humans. It's not just about money, it's about humans as well, and we need to keep that in mind. That would be all for me, and we'll have a Q&A session right now, right? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vasileios.